Thanks, Joseph. Vancouver City Council declared 2014 a year of reconciliation, an acknowledgement of the BC's treaties process and the healing that needs to happen between the City of Vancouver and local First Nations survivors of colonialism. The city began by recognizing the unceded territory of Vancouver's 3 traditional Coast Salish nations. Unceded is a legal term that means Aboriginal title is a right to the land itself, not just particular resource use. And since most of BC didn't have treaties, Aboriginal title is still the law of the land, literally. So what does this mean for stewardship? A series of Supreme Court decisions have confirmed that the provincial and national governments must properly consult with and accommodate the interests of BC's First Nations before proceeding with developments on traditional territories or things that might impact traditional territories. So how has that robust consultation gone so far? Well, as an artistic metaphor, Celtic artist Ian Reid carved this mask of Yagas, a sea monster figure, gobbling up a trespassing Enbridge pipeline oil tanker. So there's a lot of room for improvement, to say the least. And while cities do not have a seat at the modern treaty table, the recognition of unceded territory is a gesture towards reconciliation, certainty, shared interest, and joint stewardship, and so on. Land rights and resource use have been at the center of colonial tensions with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit since contact. But ecological ethics have been a part of Aboriginal stewardship since time immemorial. Can there be a reconciliation between settler and Coast Salish ecological ethics and management practices with tourism of the Strait of Georgia? While the ground rules for access, rights, and relationships to resources are, of course, specific to each nation, sometimes specific families, overarchingly, Keith Thor Carlson, an archaeologist who worked with Stalo Nation, might suggest we start by asking, what should the world look like in 240 years? And what if the voices of our great-great-great-great-grandparents, aunts and uncles, and our great-great-great-great-grandchildren, nieces and nephews, had equal say in decision-making? What would our democracy look like if they, as active citizens, were allowed to vote? If we were equally accountable to not only our future generations, but our pre-colonial past? This is part of what academics might call the 7th generation philosophy, also known as earth ethics or eco-justice or intergenerational ethics. In Hachamilam, the regional language of the Stala people, the correct term might be Timiqwe, a relational word for identity and family bonds between present, past, and future generations. In settler society, since 1994, John Elkington's triple bottom line of profit, people, and planet, which we've pictured on the left, has been the standard for corporate sustainability. The City of Vancouver, for example, has a triple bottom line that fits Elkington's model and incorporates the city's altruistic environmental and social aspirations as well as its economic goals. Notably, though Vancouver's triple bottom line acknowledges Coast Salish unceded territory, it doesn't really include in a meaningful way indigenization or life cycle tourism development anywhere within the actual strategy. And even if it did, can corporate responsibility frameworks really capture Coast Salish stewardship ethics? Increasingly, tourism scholarship speaks about a quadruple bottom line. The literature doesn't always agree on what that 4th pillar is. Is it people, profit, places, and purpose, prosperity, or maybe spiritual and cultural vitality? The jury is out, but Walters and Takamura have suggested that we need a decolonized quadruple bottom line for Indigenous innovation based on community, spirituality, sustainability, and entrepreneurship, which we've imagined visually on the left. It's important to note that the authors have replaced economics with entrepreneurship, and they focus on business innovation rather than development. They're small but important differences, because ultimately, within a Western globalized economy, the bottom line is always profit, and profit defined within very narrow terms. Triple bottom lines include a calculated commodification of social and environmental growth and damage, but then that's accounted for financially, in the same way as we always do. Entrepreneurship, rather than economics, calculates costs in slightly different terms. And innovation here is about process and moving towards sustainable institutional change, not just simply the development of better products or places. We can also try and indigenize Vancouver's renewable city vision by making it 3D. By 3D, I mean adding an extra dimension, which is time. 7 generations forwards and backwards from a present that is based on reciprocal relationships, self-determination, and shared stewardship. Also importantly, we need to add sustainable tourism that looks at the life cycle vitality of its communities within the actual strategies that this vision creates. Dr. Viola Cordova, the first American Indigenous doctor of philosophy, would suggest that professional associations have a really hard time deciding what is right and moral actions because they can't agree on a foundational ethical underpinning. In the West, especially when it comes to settler-indigenous relationships and land rights, a lot of our thinking comes from the Enlightenment era and philosophers like Calvin and Hobbes. In settler society, the I, or the individual, is the ultimate bargaining unit, according to Hobbes at least. And he sees individuals as being naturally at war with one another and in a constant state of competition. Alternatively, according to Cordova, Indigenous North Americans look at the collective, the we, not the I, and understand the fundamental nature of human beings as being social and not based on conflict. This need for an ethical alternative is foundational for decolonial Kapapa Maori and political science scholars like India's Gayatri Spivak, Aotearoa New Zealand's Linda Tuiwai-Smith, and Canada's Taiaiake Alfred, respectively. A better way forward is not so much about learning how to do things better, but unlearning the assumptions behind the epistemologies, methods, and ethics that we use now. So we know that there's a divide between settler and Indigenous understandings of water stewardship in the Strait of Georgia. But what are our tools to start building a bridge based on reconciliation, recognition, and resurgence? Because tourism is a major industry in BC with huge potential for further development. But it's also difficult to discipline. It's highly competitive, trend-driven, and dynamic, all of which makes policymaking extraordinarily difficult. In 2002, Simon Fraser University held a conference on coastal tourism led by both Indigenous and settler thought leaders, and they laid out a roadmap for the coastal tourism industry. Here are some suggestions that they had. To define institutional and legislative jurisdictional uncertainties for all the stakeholders, and this includes an understanding of the BCTC and modern treaties process. To focus on an appropriate education and an understanding of culture values that ensures that Aboriginal people's views of the resources are acknowledged and included in the policy-making process. To improve monitoring and enforcement for effective and sustainable tourism. This might involve devolving decision-making down to the local level, as communities have more knowledge to be able to deal with the realities of the decisions. Integrate environmental stewardship strategies to protect the people and the environment. Integrate human resources, education, and business development. This would stimulate the development and optimization of community benefits. Ensure a strong level of commitment to tourism by decision makers, like the provincial government, in order to view tourism as a long-term process. Identify best practices that might act as benchmarks. These would provide key principles on which to build sustainable tourism ventures in the future. Build capacity for First Nations communities to initiate, improve, and sustain tourism ventures. This includes provincial funding and partner development opportunities. Integrate the various institutional agencies. This involves improved communication and collaboration between agencies that already exist. Enhance the link between education and policy making. We can do this by supporting and encouraging academic research. There's a considerable amount of opportunities for academic collaboration with government agencies and First Nations in coastal and oceans tourism research. We are going to leave you with a promotional video from Vancouver Tourism and a contemporary Salish song from Chilliwack's Innes Jasper. We challenge you to consider the use of images of waterways and indigeneity in these videos and ask what responsibilities come alongside that as individuals, as members of the tourism industry.
A time ago, it was said we'd be dead or walking on the other side, but that was then. to it. Let's get to it. Let's get to it and build this fire.